The wind howled across the barren plains of Vostok 7, a place where Earth's last desperate settlers clawed a meager existence from frostbitten soil. Humanity had stretched too far, too fast, reaching for stars that did not welcome them. Here, the cold was not merely a season but a sovereign power, punishing the unprepared without mercy. Among the scattered mining towns and weather-beaten outposts, old stories from Earth still clung to life, stories of dark woods, hungry spirits, and monsters that devoured the foolish. When the predators came, the settlers thought them another hardship to endure. Ships, black and sleek as polished bone, rained from the grey skies without warning. The Zulvar, they called themselves, though to the settlers they were little more than nightmares given flesh, hulking, serpentine figures cloaked in gleaming armor, eyes burning like coals in deep sockets. They didn't speak much, but when they did, it was with a derision that turned the air colder still. To them, humanity was not an adversary, it was sport. Towns fell in hours. The settlers' rifles, old and patched together from 100 desperate shipments, barely scratched the invaders' plated hides. Panic scattered the people into the forests, the caves, the mountains, anywhere the Zulvar might find the hunt more troublesome than the reward. Families abandoned homes that had taken years to build, dreams sacrificed for survival. Yet even in flight, the sound of the aliens' laughter, sharp, mocking, followed them, branding the retreat with shame. Among the refugees trudging into the pines was a man different from the rest. Alexei Volkov moved with the certainty of someone who had seen worse than this. His face, a map of old scars, bore no panic, no resignation. He wore a coat patched so many times it seemed more stitched than cloth, and at his belt hung an axe worn smooth by years of use. To the younger settlers, he was a relic, a name whispered half in fear, half in awe, the Baba Yaga. Legends surrounded him like mist. Some said he had fought in wars so brutal their names were buried to hide the shame. Others believed he had once vanished into the wild for decades, returning only when civilization called him back, unwanted and unchanged. Volkov neither confirmed nor denied any of it. He moved through the world with the detached patience of a predator who knows that sooner or later, prey will come to him. They gathered in a frozen ravine that night, the last of Vostok 7's survivors, farmers, miners, engineers, a scattering of soldiers who had long since traded rifles for plows. Cold gnawed at them, and fear rooted them to the earth as surely as the frostbitten pines. They argued in hoarse whispers, about escape, about hiding, about surrender. No one spoke of fighting back. It was too absurd. Volkov listened, silent, as despair wound itself into their words. Then, without ceremony, he crouched by the fireless pit where they had gathered and picked up a handful of snow. He crushed it in his fist until water ran through his fingers. "They laugh at you," he said, his voice low, carrying across the hollow like a blade through smoke. "They think you are prey." Eyes turned to him. Some with hope, most with skepticism. Volkov's reputation had weight, but what was one man against monsters? "They are wrong," he continued, standing slowly. The firelight, or what little glow they had dared kindle, cast him in sharp relief, a figure both too large and too lean, like the wolves that had once ruled Earth's forgotten forests. "They do not know who we are." A younger man, perhaps no older than 20, spoke up. "What does it matter? We can't fight them. They have ships, weapons we've never even seen before." Volkov smiled, and the expression was not comforting. It was the smile of an old god remembering what it was to be feared. When you fight a machine, you destroy the machine. When you fight a beast, you break its spirit. No one answered. In the heavy silence, Volkov pulled the axe from his belt and drove it into a nearby log with a thudding finality. He motioned to the forest beyond. "They rely on sight, on strength, on fear. In the cities, they are kings. But here," he said, voice hardening, "in the cold, in the dark, in the wild, they are nothing." Skepticism still lingered, thick and choking. But among the faces turned toward him, a flicker of something else stirred. Desperation, yes. But beneath it, the ember of a long-buried instinct. Humanity had not crawled from the mud by being polite. They had carved empires with stone and fire, out-hunted beasts twice their size. Somewhere in their blood, they remembered. One by one, they stood, drawn to the gravity of his certainty. Not all were convinced. Not all needed to be. Enough would suffice. We will not survive by running, Volkov said, sheathing the axe with a grunt. We will teach them fear. Above them, in the black sky, the Zulvar ships circled like carrion birds. Somewhere distant, the shriek of a dying animal echoed through the forest, but no one flinched. Not anymore. Volkov turned into the woods without another word, trusting they would follow. And they did. The night became their shield. Beneath the shivering canopy of frost-heavy pines, Volkov moved like a phantom, his breath a ghostly mist in the freezing air. The settlers stumbled after him, clumsy with fear but learning. Every snapped twig, every careless step drew a sharp glance from him, each one a silent reprimand more effective than any shouted order. They made their camp in a ravine choked with fallen trees and brambles thick as wire. Volkov crouched among them, scratching crude diagrams into the snow with the butt of his axe. They gathered close, peering at the rough shapes, traps, ambushes, kill zones. These were no grand battles with banners and songs. This would be a war of teeth and blood. He assigned roles with terse efficiency. The boy who had spoken against him earlier, Rurik, was nimble and sharp-eyed. He would bait. An older woman, Marta, whose hands were steady even in the cold, would rig the deadfall traps. Everyone had a task. No one was exempt. In the wild, weakness was a kindness none could afford. By the second night, the first trap was set. A narrow gorge where the trees leaned heavy over a frozen creek, their branches groaning under the weight of snow. Marta and a handful of others spent hours rigging the deadfall, carefully sawing through load-bearing branches until a single touch would bring a crushing avalanche upon anything foolish enough to pass below. They waited, hidden among the rocks and snowdrifts, breath shallow, hearts hammering. Hours crawled past. Frost crept into their boots, their gloves, gnawing at their fingers and toes. Doubt festered, growing heavier with each passing minute. What if the Zulvar didn't come? What if they had misjudged their prey entirely? Then a soft thrum vibrated through the ground, so faint it might have been imagined. Volkov's eyes snapped open, sharp as flint. He motioned for silence. Figures emerged from the trees, black against black, their armor gleaming dully in the faint starlight. 3 of them, their elongated heads turning slowly as they scanned the surroundings. They moved with terrifying grace, every step calculated, every movement efficient. In their clawed hands, they carried long-barreled weapons that hummed with restrained energy. Rurik moved first, just as instructed. A stumble, a clatter of rock against rock, the terrified scrabble of a wounded human. It was bait no true predator could resist. The Zulvar tensed, heads swiveling toward the sound. A low series of clicks passed between them, something almost like a language. Then they advanced. As they passed beneath the trees, Volkov gave the signal, a sharp bird call, swallowed almost instantly by the frozen night. Marta pulled the line hidden among the roots. The deadfall came down in an instant. Tons of snow, broken branches, and sharpened stakes crashed onto the Zulvar, silencing 2 instantly under the crushing weight. The third staggered, roaring in a guttural, furious noise. Before it could recover, a dozen settlers surged from the shadows, driving makeshift spears and sharpened tools into the gaps of its armor. It fought, oh how it fought! Blades and claws flashing, it carved bloody rents into the attackers. But numbers, fury, and desperation proved greater than its training. It collapsed into the snow with a final, choked rasp, its blood steaming against the ice. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. The settlers stood panting, staring down at the bodies with a mixture of awe and horror. For the first time, they had struck back. They had killed the monsters. Volkov approached the remains, knelt, and inspected them with a soldier's cold eye. He turned one of the fallen creatures over and traced the armor's seams with a gloved hand. He picked up the alien weapon, testing its weight, its balance. It was too advanced, its mechanisms a mystery, but even without it, they had won. He rose and faced the settlers, his face unreadable. They are not gods, he said simply. They bleed. That night, around a carefully shielded fire, they dared to speak louder. They dared to smile, if only for a heartbeat. Victory, however small, had shifted something fundamental in them. They were no longer cattle waiting for the slaughter. They had remembered the old, bitter truth of their species, that humanity, when cornered, did not kneel. Volkov remained apart, sharpening his axe with slow, deliberate strokes. Each scrape of stone on metal was a vow renewed. This was only the beginning. The Zulvar would not fall easily. Predators grew more dangerous when wounded. But fear had been sown among them, and fear was a weapon as potent as any blade. As the fire died to embers, he rose and stared into the forest's black heart. Somewhere out there, the Zulvar were regrouping, reassessing. They would come again, and when they did, it would be with greater ferocity, greater cruelty. They would seek to crush this defiance before it could spread. Good. Let them come. Volkov smiled, and in the darkness of the woods, something smiled back. The retaliations came swiftly. Within days, the Zulvar swept across the forests with ruthless precision, their searchlights burning through the mist like searing white spears. They hunted with rage now, no longer patient, no longer mocking. The hunters had tasted fear, and it soured their judgment. Volkov watched from the cliffs above a narrow pass, his breath hidden beneath a scarf of tattered wool. Below, a column of Zulvar soldiers moved in formation, weapons at the ready, scanning the trees with frantic energy. Their armor gleamed, but it could not conceal the tension in their movements. They had grown wary, cautious. They had learned that death could wear a human face. The settlers had learned too. No longer did they stumble like frightened prey. Now they moved with quiet purpose, blending into the broken landscape with a savage competence born of necessity. Every trap sprung, every ambush unleashed, every whisper of death from the shadows pushed the invaders closer to panic. Tonight, Volkov had planned something different. No more isolated strikes. No more bleeding the enemy slowly. Tonight, they would cut off the head. Far to the east, hidden in the ancient caverns that gored the mountain's spine, the Zulvar leadership had established a command post, arrogant in its belief that no human could mount a direct assault. Volkov intended to prove them wrong. At his side, Rurik knelt, peering through a battered scope jury-rigged to an old rifle. He shifted uneasily, still not fully comfortable with the weight of leadership Volkov had forced upon him. "They are moving more cautiously," Rurik murmured. "Harder to predict." Volkov grunted, a sound that could have meant agreement or disdain. Fear clouds instinct. Makes them stupid. He rose and signaled the others forward. The settlers crept up the slope, silent as snowfall, their weapons crude but their wills sharpened to razors. Each man and woman carried more than tools. They carried memory of lost homes, murdered kin, laughter strangled by alien hands. Memory made them strong. They reached the cave mouth by midnight. A gaping maw in the mountain, it exhaled a cold, fetid air that spoke of deep places and darker things. Guards stood at the entrance, their eyes sweeping, but not deep enough. They looked for armies, not phantoms. Volkov moved first, a blur of motion. The axe sang through the night, finding the vulnerable gap at the base of an armored skull. One guard fell without a sound. The second raised his weapon, but Mata was faster, a knife flashing between the plates at his armpit. He gurgled and collapsed, twitching. Inside the cavern, the walls dripped with moisture, the ceilings lost to darkness. Strange alien machinery pulsed and hummed, casting eerie, shifting lights across the stone. The settlers fanned out, their steps sure, their hearts pounding in unison. Volkov led them deeper, navigating by instinct more than sight. He could feel the presence ahead, the gathering of commanders, the architects of this invasion. They would be fierce. They would not surrender. Good. Neither would he. They struck without warning. Chaos exploded within the cavern. The settlers moved like wolves, fast and merciless. Zulvar officers shouted orders in their grating tongue, but the words dissolved into screams as the humans cut them down. Volkov hurled himself into the thick of it, his axe rising and falling in brutal, economical arcs. Every swing told a of earth, of survival, of defiance unbent by time or terror. A massive figure loomed ahead, the Zulvar war leader, towering over his kin, armor etched with 1,000 battles. His weapon, a blade fused with plasma, hissed as it ignited. He roared a challenge, a sound that shook the cavern walls. Volkov answered by charging. Their clash was a collision of primal forces. The alien's blade sizzled through the air, carving gashes into the stone. Volkov ducked and weaved, his movements stripped of anything unnecessary, pure ruthless intent. Sparks flew as steel met alien alloy. Blood, human and not, spattered the ground. The war leader struck with terrifying strength, battering Volkov backward. For a moment, it seemed the end inevitable. But Volkov's smile never faltered. He dropped low, driving the spike of his axe up under the war leader's chin, piercing through armor, through flesh, through whatever passed for a soul. The creature shuddered, its weapon falling from limp claws. Volkov yanked his axe free and stepped back as the giant collapsed, the impact echoing like thunder. Around them, the remaining Zulvar faltered. Without leadership, without the iron hand to drive them forward, they broke. Fear, once an ember, now roared into a consuming blaze. Some threw down their weapons. Others fled into the dark, abandoning their technology, their pride, everything, in a desperate bid for survival. Volkov stood amidst the ruin, chest heaving, face a grim mask. He turned to the few surviving Zulvar who had dropped to their knees in surrender. His voice, when he spoke, carried through the cavern like a judgment. "You are predators," he said, his words slow, deliberate, each one a nail in their defeat. "But we are apex predators." No one challenged him. No one dared. By dawn, the Zulvar ships had fled Vostok 7, black streaks vanishing into the upper atmosphere, tails tucked tight in disgrace. The settlers watched their departure in silence, the enormity of what they had accomplished too vast for immediate celebration. Volkov said nothing. He retrieved his axe, wiped the blood from the blade, and vanished into the forest before the sun had fully risen, leaving behind a story that would be told for generations. A warning. A promise. In the deep wilds, where legends are born and monsters are made, the Baba Yaga walked once more. Weeks passed. The snow melted from the valleys first, revealing broken ground scarred by the fires of conflict. Smoke no longer curled from the ruins of the settlement. Instead, fresh timber rose, rough and defiant, shaped by calloused hands that had refused to die. Life clawed its way back, stubborn as the roots of the ancient trees. Volkov watched it all from the tree line, unseen, the scent of pine and damp earth thick in the warming air. The settlers moved with a new rhythm now, no longer the hesitant shuffle of prey, but the steady stride of people who had faced death and earned their right to remain. Children laughed again among the rebuilt homes, their voices piercing the forest like birdsong. It was a fragile sound, but it carried the weight of victory. Rurik had grown into his role, no longer the reckless boy who had once challenged Volkov's authority. Now he spoke with calm certainty, his decisions measured, his words respected. Volkov had shaped him without pity, and now, seeing the result, felt a pang that was not quite pride. But peace, Volkov knew, was a lie whispered by empty bellies and tired hearts. The Zulvar were only the first. The universe was vast, indifferent, and full of teeth. He moved through the forest without sound, senses tuned to every snap of twig, every shift of wind. His instincts, honed sharp by years of blood and hardship, whispered of unease. Something watched from beyond the ridges. Something new. At the edge of a clearing, Volkov crouched, surveying the signs. Deep gouges scarred the bark of trees. Scorch marks blackened the earth in tight, deliberate patterns, unlike the haphazard destruction of battle. No tracks, no bodies, only the heavy, oppressive weight of a presence just beyond sight. He returned to the settlement that evening, slipping from the shadows like smoke. Rurik met him outside the council hall, where the settlers gathered to plan the season's planting. His eyes widened slightly at Volkov's grim expression. "What is it?" Rurik asked, stepping away from the others. Volkov said nothing at first, only handing him a strip of bark, the surface burned with strange, almost organic symbols that twisted uneasily under the firelight. Not Zulvar. Something else. They are coming, Volkov said finally. And they are worse. Rurik's mouth tightened, but he nodded. Then we'll be ready. The council convened late into the night, every voice low and grim. Plans were drawn, weapons distributed. Scouts dispatched to the ridges. Volkov sat apart, sharpening his axe with slow, steady strokes, the stone rasping in the silence between strategies. He listened without speaking. He had taught them to survive, but surviving what approached would demand more than cunning or courage. It would demand something primal, something ancient. As the settlement darkened into uneasy sleep, Volkov moved again into the woods, drawn by a pull he could not name. He climbed the high ridge where the old world and the new one met, and where the stars bled cold light across the sky. From that height, he saw them. Ships. Dozens. Sleek, black, silent. No bombastic arrival, no roaring engines. They slipped into the atmosphere like vipers sliding into a nest. These were not soldiers coming to conquer. These were something else entirely, harvesters, perhaps, or worse, the sort of predators that did not see humanity as enemies or subjects, but as raw material. Volkov felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. These newcomers made the Zulvar seem clumsy and arrogant by comparison. He did not know their names. He did not need to. Names were for the living, for those who planned to tell stories. He turned back toward the valley, the axe heavy in his hands, and began the descent. In the distance, beyond the mountains, beyond even the whisper of the forest, a new dawn crept across the horizon. It was thin, and weak, and trembling against the darkness gathering at the edges of the world. But it was still a dawn. At the tree line, Marta waited for him, a crude spear in her hands. Others joined her, one by one. Old, young, scarred, weary. Farmers. Carpenters. Children who had never held a weapon before. They did not flinch from him. They did not ask foolish questions. They only stood with him, silent and grim, facing the night. Volkov said nothing as he reached them. He only looked at their faces, and they looked back with eyes that understood what was coming. He raised his axe, the blade catching the first trembling light of morning. And together, they marched into the shadow, where monsters waited, and legends were made.